Super Joe Pardo is a business optimization strategist, and he brings not only strategy, but application and execution planning to entrepreneurs everywhere. He's the founder of the Super Joe Pardo Show, as well as the Independent Podcast Conference. He focuses on putting the right methods into practice that help to bring about personalized solutions for every client that he works with. Today, he and I talk about how he left $100 million family business behind with much objection from his family. And he didn't even have a plan. He said, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out. And now he helps entrepreneurs of all kind go from just pennies in the bank to establishing 9-figure businesses. Another thing that I love about what Joe has been able to do is he is masterful at creating community. He understands what it means to see a need within a market and to fill that need and bringing people together to have intelligent conversations that drive entrepreneurs forward. Welcome to the Lindsay Elmore Show, a podcast that helps you find fulfillment amidst chaos. On this show, I interview thought leaders, doctors, creatives, spiritual gurus, and game changers who inspire you to pursue your dreams, overcome obstacles, and leave your mark. Joe Pardo, thank you so much for being on the Lindsay Elmore Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay. It's a great honor, pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to helping your audience get to that next level with their business.
I can't wait to learn from you because you have been in business for a very long time and you have helped startup entrepreneurs go from just having pennies in the bank to 9-figure businesses. And I think for a lot of people, that seems completely out of the realm of reality. And so tell us your story. How did you go from just being Joe from New Jersey to the Super Joe Pardo that I see in front of me today?
Well, first of all, thank you. And so I grew up in a family business in the trucking industry here in South Jersey, outside of Philadelphia, where I still live and literally live in the house I grew up in from '92. I'm not born in '92, but yeah, so I've lived here since '92. Still live here today, and raising my family here in South Jersey. And growing up in a family business, growing up in the warehouse of that business and sweeping floors, counting inventory, sweating it throughout the summers. It taught me a lot. I got to learn under some really great guys. My grandfather, my dad, my great grandfather, to an extent, my great uncle who had a sister business in the repair side of the trucking industry. And so for me, I just gravitated towards the idea of structure, processes. Like growing up, one of my favorite things to do was play Sim City, because again, structure, processes, and creating something bigger and all of that. So it all kind of plays into where I ended up being the director of operations of $100 million company that was owned by my family, and just embracing technology along the way. And because I grew up in front of a computer, that's, like when my family grew up under trucks, I grew up in front of a computer, which helped me develop how, learning the program and how computers think and algorithms and all that kind of stuff. And while I didn't go into the coding side, I kind of thought I would in high school, I got more in depth into the processes side of building the business and making it so that the transactions between us and our customers and us and our team members was a lot simpler. So I had like a real hands-on view growing up with all the different aspects and facets of a really big business, the largest independently owned truck parts company on the East Coast. In 2014, well, actually in like 2013, I decided I had had enough. I was ready. I was fed up. I was ready to leave. I didn't know what it really looked like. I went back to school because I didn't have a degree. And that was at the age of 26, 27. So I eventually left April 2nd, 2014. And that was like specifically that was my last day. And started helping business owners. A month later, I started up the Super Joe Pardo show. It was originally called the Dreamers Podcast, but it always had a slant towards business, and eventually it grew into that where I was bringing entrepreneurs and business owners from like all over the world to have great conversations. I got to learn a ton. So not only did I grow up with it, with two awesome titans of an industry, I got to learn from over 300 different entrepreneurs and business owners from around the world in different industries and different niches. So for me, like it helped energize me. And right out of the gate, I started coaching small business owners. I was also designing websites because that was kind of a thing that I was able to do to make bridge some of the gaps early on. Was designing websites. I've been designing websites since like 96, 97. And, so like in funny story, like my first client paid me in laundry detergent because that's what she made, which was cool at the time. I got to cut my teeth and all that. But being the person that's always been the person that like people come to for advice, even people that are, 20, 30 years older than myself, even as a kid, like people would come to me to listen and to dissect and bring up different topics and play devil's advocate and all things. So for me, like going into that coaching role just made sense. Like it really enabled me because like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a child psychologist to help other kids be going through divorce like I was. But I didn't want to go to school for 10 years. And ultimately I've gotten to help kids because of my self-development books that I've written, do those talks and all that stuff. So it kind of like is a childhood dream realized, even if it wasn't in a traditional sense that required a whole bunch of teaching and all that to get there.
Well, and I
Yeah.
can say for sure because I am the product of the 10-year post high school education, and not only is it the time but the money that you pour into it and the wealth that you could be accumulating earlier on that then you're paying towards student loans, and by the time you get out from under the student loans, which I'm lucky. I'm out from under mine. A lot of people are still paying them 15, 20, 30 years later. And when you finally get out from under them, you're like, okay, well, now what do I do? Because my whole financial structure was just pay off the loans. But I want to know, you were in a family that had $100 million business, and yet you left it all behind, probably not exactly knowing what you were going to do. You didn't have some Juris Doctorate, or you didn't have a doctorate to like help you get where you wanted to go. Why did you do it, and how did you come to the realization that it was the right choice for you?
Yeah. So the only schooling I had, I went to college for 1.5 semesters before I dropped out back in 2004 into 2005. So, when I started thinking about leaving, it was about like a 4 to 5, I would say maybe even a 6 year uh like lead up to this idea that like, I'm really not happy doing what I'm doing. I'm not really happy here. The politics of family business, the politics of the people that work there since I've been born, the lack of wanting to change and adjust, really I learned a lot of lessons. I'll tell you, like those last few years leading up to me deciding to leave in the summer of 2013, really like tested me, and it put me through the paces, right? Like I was doing a huge, massive inventory undertaking, went from $6 million in inventory down to $2.5 million in inventory in under 2 years. So, which I didn't even get to see the end of all the way through, because in about a year into the process, I left. Um, actually, no, it was a little bit long. No, it was like that because it was 2012 we started the inventory reroll. I apologize. So anyway, coming to that decision was, a lot of people think it was a lot harder than than I probably needed to make it. And the reason being is, when you're coming home every day and you're having those conversations with your wife about like, hey, or your husband or whoever will listen to you, and you start talking, and then it turns into yelling, and it's not yelling at the person, but you're just yelling because you're so frustrated with the way things are, the way people look the other way, the lack of growth and movement in certain directions. It just gets to a point where it's like, okay, so my safety switch is to go watch something funny, right? Like a South Park or a Tosh.0 or something I can like turn my mind off for like 10 minutes and then come back down to reality. And then all of a sudden I can enjoy the rest of my night. And I remember, after telling my dad that I wanted to leave, it was not a welcome thing at all. It was very much turned very hostile very quickly and very uncomfortable. And again, I still did not know what I wanted to do. So what I did was I was like, all right, I'm going to re-enroll into college. So I re-enrolled into college. I was only going to do two classes a semester because like I just didn't have the time to do more. And so I did that, as well as I started going to networking events and trying to meet other people in other industries that I thought maybe I'd be interested in in going into that industry. One of which was sports, which I actually ended up making a friend of mine he was like number 3 in the line of running the ECHL out of Princeton, New Jersey, and which is the East Coast Hockey League for anyone that doesn't know. It's like a minor league for hockey league, or for the NHL. And so, and basically by the end of the night, like we ended up talking like the whole night. Like we walked out to his car and we were still talking, and he's like, yeah, because he came from a family business background as well, where he didn't want to do the thing that, was provided out of the gate. So he totally understood. And he's like, Joe, he's like, if you really want to value your time and get that time back that you've effectively have lost while running this family business and all that stuff, he's like, sports is not for you. He's like, this is not going to give you any kind of the freedoms that you're looking for out of a career somewhere else other than where you are now. And I was like, wow, that's really eye-opening. So in one night, I went from like, hey, this would be really cool, I could open up some doors, go to school, to like, okay, great. Like I'm moving on, like next thing. So, just examples like that where I'd go to these networking events and meet people, really pick their brain and figure out like, what is it about that industry that I might like or might not like. And ultimately, I was still stuck. December 31st was supposed to be my last day. On January 2nd, I still came back to work, and I'm like, I don't have a plan. And things were kind of getting really shaky at that point in the company, because kind of the 2008 was still like running rampant, in 2012, as well as the micro recession that we had. So it was absolutely, I don't know if you just heard that thunder.
Oh yeah, was that thunder?
Yeah, that was thunder.
I didn't know if it was the rumbling of your tummy or if there was a storm outside.
I ate a well lunch. A big lunch. So yeah, so I still wasn't sure in it, and it took another couple of months. And even when I left, I didn't know what I was going to do. Like when I left, it ended in a fist fight between me and my dad.
Oh my gosh.
It was after,
How terrible.
It was terrible. But the thing is sometimes we need that push to be like, we can't go back. Like, it's over, right? Like, I don't know. I still really didn't know what I was going to do. I was still in school, had done, 4 classes at that point. And was doing really well in all 4 of those classes, though I had started to become friends with my teachers, and they were like, we're not really sure why you're here. You obviously have all this experience. You're going to get your bachelor's degree in about 8 years at the rate you're going. What are you and then you're not even going to, or not bachelor's, associates. And then where is your bachelor? You're still have to go get your bachelor's, show. And like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, I don't know. Cause I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And So like I said, it ended in a fist fight between me and my dad. And I tell people that because I want people to understand that money doesn't solve all problems. You know, it, and I want you to like step back. If you're in that situation where you're in a family business or in a position where maybe you've known your boss a long time and maybe you're like friends or something to that effect, where it's more than just like, nah, I hate my boss and that's this is like he could go fall off a cliff and it would be all right. It would not, wouldn't change my heart that, my day one bit. Um, you know, it's tough, right? And it's really tough when it's family because we don't want to get to that point, but a lot of times we do things subconsciously that put us in that position where it's like, hey, here comes the push. It's going to go off, and that's it. Like, there's no going back. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do now, right? I had some money saved up, but I still had a house, still had car payments, and bills to pay. Fortunately, my wife was a teacher at the time, so it wasn't a huge detriment out of the gate. And it was a month later that I found podcasting. That because I'm also a DJ. You can see in the background here my turntables. So nice. Yeah, right. So I just put out my first DJ album. I'm on a plane to Disney World because I'm a big Disney head with a friend of mine to go run a race. I'm also a runner, and I was like, hey, is there any other Disney podcasts I could jump on to like promote this album? Because at the time it was a Disney mashup album, like Disney music and mashed up with hip hop instrumentals to tell the story of Pixar's Up. So it's a lot of fun. Love the album. A lot of people really, especially kids, they absolutely love it. I always, like you said, like in 10 years from now, when all these kids grow up, they're going to be like, whoa, where did this piece, where did this come from? So he's like, oh yeah, but you should like listen to this other show. He was talking about Entrepreneur on Fire, which had just gotten started like 6 months earlier. And I was like, oh, I only thought about podcasting in a Disney sense. And right then I was like, oh, well, like if there's somebody just interviewing entrepreneurs, like I could interview business people all day long. I've been in business around my business all my life. And that's when I was like, but I know a lot more people that live their dreams and can inspire other people. And that's where the Dreamers podcast came from. The plane landed. I already had a list of 100 names I wanted to have on the show. I registered the domain name, the Twitter handle, the Facebook page before we got to the rental car. Reached out to my man, Al Kessel. And it was like, hey, can you help me? I just need a couple, like figure out like, how do I get the podcast feed together? And bam, 2 weeks later, I had the first episode of Dreamers podcast out. And it's 400 episodes later. It's now called the Super Joe Pardo Show. And we've had all kinds of business leaders and all kinds of business lessons in like it's chock full of business all these years later. That's from almost over 6 years ago now.
I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you just
said.
I know.
First
and foremost, I mean, I think it is important that you mentioned that you got into an altercation with your dad, because although not ideal, not what we want to be doing, I think that so many people, especially women, we're miserable in what we're doing. We hate our jobs. We hate the prescribed roles. And instead of just having that 30 seconds of insanity of just like, no, I quit, I'm not doing this, we end up becoming very passive aggressive. And so it's like those subtle digs that happen each day. And then there's like, and then there's like this underlying wave of malcontent that you're having to deal with. So to all of our listeners, just have the 30 seconds of crazy to just say, I'm done, and be resolute with it. Another thing is, I love how when someone told you sports aren't for you, you heard that and something registered in your brain and you were like, that person is right. That happened to me too. I was planning on going to medical school. Decided, forget it, I don't want to go to medical school. And so then I was going to get a PhD in chemistry. And I had a couple of women who had PhDs in chemistry who said, don't do it. It's not your personality. You're going to hate it. You're going to hate it. And I listened and I heard that and I said, something in that makes sense. And so when you hear that piece of advice that makes sense for whatever reason, just trust it and go for it. So let's fast forward now to where you are. You had a fire lit up under you. You said, I don't know why, but I'm going to start a podcast. I want 100 guests. I'm going to register my domain name, all of the things. When someone identifies something within them that they have that fire about and they go, I have no idea how this is going to work, but I'm going to figure out how to make it work. Where on earth do they begin?
Well, as a computer guy, I'm always looking to reverse engineer anything, right? So my first thing was I actually it took me about a year and a half before I even listened to John's show, because I'm a true believer that when you go and you become a creator, you need to severely limit what you're taking in, because you don't want to sound like everybody else. And that's why, like, when I put out books, everyone that has read those books is like, I've never read anything like this. I'm like, it's because Joe doesn't read books. So that's why, that's why it's very different than anything you're probably going to find out there. And which is to me is huge, right? Like I'm not trying to repackage other people's stuff, but we do that subconsciously regardless, right? So what I did was while I didn't listen to John's show, I did read his financial reports and was looking like, okay, so like these are the things that he's doing to turn this into a business. Because at the time, I still didn't know what it was. Like, I kind of was doing the Dreamers podcast to figure out what the heck I wanted to do, because this was a month removed from me leaving and still not knowing what it is that I really wanted to do with my life. So after I started reading into it, I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna speak, write books, and coach. Like that's, and the driver for all that is going to be the podcast. Now the original intent was it was like business, but not really business. My demographic was like all over the place. I kind of thought it was going to be like mostly kids, ended up being mostly middle-aged women. So it did not really like it took a little while to kind of correct my ship and figure out like where it is that the people that were actually listening to the show right now were wanted to head, right? So but I always wanted to keep my show family friendly, because that's just my nature and all that. And I want, because there are kids that did listen to the show and as far as I know still continue to do listen to the show. So I want it to be open for them to learn, but at the same time it's not necessarily targeted towards them. So, so I, looking at people, look at the people that have already done it, right? Look at like really in depth, like break down as much information as you can get about those people who have done it, because just because someone else has done it doesn't mean that you can't do it. In fact, that's the direct opposite. It means that you could do it. And whether you should do it is maybe a different thing, right? Like I could have totally went into sports. Apparently it means I shouldn't, somebody told me like, yeah, probably not for you. If you get told, hey, my grandmom's in the hospital and she might die. Well, the Eagles are playing the Packers in Green Bay. Hope she doesn't die when we're gone. Like when you get back, you can go see her.
Yeah, it's one of those things, choosing the work that you do that allows you to live life. That's the ultimate goal, is how do I have work that sustains me and fulfills me, but it's not my everything, That's a big deal.
Well, yeah, and it's tough too, because people like, sometimes I think we get caught up in the idea that we have to be the original creators of everything that we create, and total like ding ding, totally guilty right here, right? But at the same time, like it doesn't have to be that way. Not every single person ends up being the most original or even appearing the most original, because they resonate because they have the right story, right? They resonate because they're messaging it to the right people. Maybe at the right time, right? Right now, like if you had a COVID related stuck at home kind of message before, and it's like, it's not really resonating. All of a sudden, like boom, COVID happens. Oh, well, where were you all my life, right? Because more people are resonating with it, and they want to be a part of your story in one way or another. So, looking at figuring out like where are the revenue streams going to come from, right? And what is it that's going to make you happy? It might not be the end all be all for you as far as like you're the most passionate about the thing that you're going and you're selling and creating. Especially if you're in the like the MLMs, right? Like it might be a stepping stone to the thing that you are that passionate about. But not every person is going to come out and be the next person that goes on Shark Tank with the next brilliant idea, right? Like that. Like if you're looking for that, that's tough. That's really tough. And the next brilliant idea that's cost effective to create, cost effective to sell, solves the right problem at the right time. Like there's so many things that have to come together to make that perfect and work, that sometimes it does make more sense. I mean, I know plenty of friends that are affiliate marketers for other people's programs because they know how to get in front of people, they know how to do the messaging, but they're not taking the time to create their own products or services or anything like that. They're just like, I just want to, collect my check. Get in front of the camera, get in front of the blog post, do, and then hit send and call it a day, because I know that like I have a formula that I've created for myself that I'm going to sell no matter what I get in front of those people for. So there's so many different ways, and I feel like when you're especially when you're just getting started, it's weird. It doesn't hurt to try a bunch of different things, but at the same time it can hurt in the sense that people and personal branding, they when they think about you, they think of one thing, right? In most cases, maybe two if you're really, really lucky, but usually one thing. And I'll tell you, out of the gate, one of my biggest missteps was I got more known for podcasting than actually like the thing I was podcasting about, outside of the people that were on my show, outside of the people that were listening to the show. They're like, oh, this is Joe and he's in the pod, he'll help you with your podcast. And I was like, no, I help people with their business. Like, just because you've never heard the word, I mean, this is also in 2014, so 6 years ago. Like, just because you had just recently heard of the word podcasting doesn't mean that just because I'm doing one means that that's everything. That's my everything. Coincidentally, I started up the MidAtlantic podcast conference, now independent podcast conference. But even still, it's weird how people get like things stuck in their mind. Like they think your name, they think of a one, maybe full sentence tops of what you are. So it can hurt you if you don't really sit down and think about what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's something that I've run into, because, when people think of me, a lot of people are like, oh, she's an essential oil educator. She's the pharmacist that knows about essential oils, but it's like, yeah, but I also am the CEO and chief content creator and owner of an education company that sustains not only my livelihood, but the livelihoods of other people. Really, I start thinking about, how do I convince people that my goal is really to put the soul back into the practice of medicine. And so that involves pharmacy, it involves essential oils, it involves supplements, but it also involves yoga and spirituality and meditation and clean eating and all of these different things that in the past have felt very fractured as a brand. But then as you keep working it and you keep sharing the messaging, it all starts to come together. So I would like to know one more thing. A lot of our listeners, they work, they want their business, but they don't understand quite how to craft communities. And that's something that you have done really, really well, is to help bring together communities of like-minded people. Did you originally set out and say, like, I'm going to make this Facebook page and I'm going to bring together all these podcast people? Or did you say, like, well, I know this one person who needs to know this other person? Did you research and say, well, there is this community, it's just I can do it better? How can our listeners go about looking around, identifying who the heck they are and who they want to be, and then crafting a community around that?
So, Yeah. Well, so the way I wound up creating the originally MidAtlantic podcast conference was, I grew up going to my family's vendor nights, which was like a customer appreciation. They would have like 1,000 customers come through. It started back in '81. Like I think the first or second year of the company's existence, my grandfather would put on these events. He would come through like all these vendor booths and get like the pens and all that stuff, and then go over to like the free buffet and the open bar. So as a kid, like I'd go around grabbing all like the pens and like the free giveaway trucks and things of that nature. And so I just always loved the idea of bringing people together and like how it affects like the industry as a whole, right? Like when people would come through, they'd be like, this is the best show that I get to go and do every single year. And I'm like, really? Like this is, it was big, but it wasn't like massive. It wasn't, it was in a catering hall that was a relatively big place, but not like convention center level or anything like that.
Yeah, you're not at the Javits Center for like Comic-Con,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But I think the point is that the right people were there, and that's what's special.
Yep. Yeah. So it was, and it taught me a lot about managing an event and how to make it profitable and like sometimes really profitable in more ways than one. So growing up, I got involved in doing other events. So I do LAN parties where a bunch of us would bring our computers together and play games. And I was, we did like a 512 person LAN party back in the early 2000s. And as I got more into DJing, I was hosting raves, and I got involved with other conventions that had tens of thousands of people, and I would, volunteer and stuff like that. So I just love the idea of bringing people together. And so I was in Disney World, of course, and I was at an event for a podcast that I listened to, and they have it was like a 4-day event every year in December. Anyway, I took one of those days and I went to this event called Podcast Florida. And it was hosted by Lou Mangello and Jared Easley. And I met so many incredible people that I'm still friends with to this day. There was like 60 of us packed in this tiny little room. It was kind of hot and we were on top of each other, but it was just so much fun. And when I came back, I was like, I want to bring together podcasters. Like I didn't realize that, like the person I sat next to came from Toronto to be there. I mean, heck, I came from Jersey to be there. I mean, I didn't specifically go for the event, but because I was in Disney and it was in downtown Disney at the time, I was, I was game. So I was like, I could put something together. And I was going to do something for like the Philly area, but then I was like, well, let's go a little bit bigger. And it turned out to be the, mid-Atlantic states, which ultimately, if I could go back and talk to myself and say, do one thing different, it would be make it broader, because even at the very beginning of the Facebook group, the people that were in there were not all from the Mid-Atlantic states. In fact, the majority of them were not at all from the Mid-Atlantic. So it very quickly became like, oh, this is where we host the event every year, not who joins the group. But I would get these emails every single year. Can I come? I live in California. Am I able to come to this? Like, yes, it's just where it's held, not who is supposed to be a membership. So 5 years later, talking with one of my team members, he was like, you should really hammer this independent thing. And like a few weeks before our event past September, I decided to change the name. And all of a sudden, like our membership just started going up like every single day. We go up 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people a day. Wow. So it had I literally changed one word, Mid-Atlantic to independent. And all of a sudden people were finding it, identifying with it, and jumping in. And COVID happened, and I was able to grow that, exponentially off of that, because I was home. I decided to, like, hey, things are like kind of slow with a lot of my clients, my business clients. I'm home from the shop, from the repair shop, because in 2018 I went back to scale that into a franchisable business. We got maybe about 50 to 60% of the way there, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go hard on this whole, like, let's bring in a bunch of people, because we had already grown from 450 members in September when we changed the name to about 900, 850, 900 in just like less than 6 months. So it was like, okay. And then we held the first virtual event, and that's, it skyrocketed up from that. And now we're over 1,800 members now, well on our way to 1,850. So it's, why did I do it? It's because I love bringing people together. And I think that's really got to be the number one thing, because you have to, be available for people. And that was one of the things I was real vulnerable about at our last event, our first face-to-face event back in September, was like, hey, I know our Facebook group is not very active except for leading up to the event. And then after the event, it starts to peter off. And, so I want to do a better job of like keeping it active. And we were doing like a weekly Facebook Live and things like that throughout the year, but really I didn't put a lot of focus into it. And once I started to, once I made that commitment, I started posting every single day. I guess, more people saw it and resonated and invited other people, and it grew from there.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I love that, because you not only had the desire to bring people together, you put the work in to
Yep.
make it happen, and responded to the messages that you got, responded to the inquiries that you had. And your vision was just, how do I bring more people into this equation? Because you understood that the storytelling that was going on in podcasting was profound. You also understood, going all the way back to your college-ish days, that when you put yourself in rooms with people with diversity of experience and diversity of lives, you can learn from other people so very much. And likely that moment that you had of, don't go into sports, it's not for you. You could have spent 5-10 years going down that pathway, only to realize, I am just as miserable now as I was when I was in trucking. And so I think it's extraordinarily important for our listeners. If you would like to grow a business, find other people who also want to grow businesses and learn from them. You can read Joe's books. He has a free download for you if you head to superjoepardo.com/rocket, which is 5 proven methods to increase your business value. I am not like Joe. I read lots of books, but it helps me to, it helps me to frame the world, and it helps me to understand different perspectives. But yet, I hear what you're saying, because I was just thinking, I know I want to write another book, but what is my ultimate philosophy on health, on life, on the world around me? What is the book I can write that is unlike anything anyone else writes? And so I got to get your download too, just so I can see what's inside that brain of yours that I'm not reading from other people. So everybody go check out superjoepardo.com/rocket for your free download on ways that you can accelerate your business. Joe Pardo, thank you again for being on the Lindsay Elmore Show.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Turning your creative passions into a viable business may seem like a daunting task. You may not know how to identify your audience, create a product that you can sell to them authentically, or how to run your business like a business. That's okay. Everybody has to start somewhere. That's why I created an easy-to-understand 5-step guide to becoming an entrepreneur. You can access the free guide by heading to www.lindsayelmore.com/5steps. That's www.lindsayelmore.com/5steps. The Lindsay Elmore Show is written and produced by me, Lindsay Elmore. Show segments are produced by Sue Procco and Kelsey Lorman. Production design, sound design, and editing is by Jive Media. If you have a question about this or any other episode of the podcast, send us an email to hello@lindsayelmoreshow.com. And hey, since you're still here, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And while you're at it, go over and follow us on Instagram Lindsay Elmore Show. This helps us bring the pod to more people.